Hey folks. So I want to help everyone with second degree functions today. And what's great about second degree functions when you encounter them on the CST exam is that they always have the form y equals ax squared somewhere in them. So one thing to look out for when you're looking at long answer questions is, do I ever see anything where there's a number, like this is a number, and then an x squared portion? And the question here is that kind of question. Now I'm going to read it through with you together so that we get an idea of what's being asked. So here we go. James, Steve, and Chris all have trampolines. Both are circular, actually all of them are circular, but each one has a different radius. To prevent their young kids from jumping on the trampolines without parental supervision, all of the dads bought protective covers and nets for the trampolines. So what's interesting is that we have some information below about protective covers and nets. And I notice that there's a function for each one. Function f of x equals 10x squared, can be used to describe the protective cover. And we notice that x would be the radius in meters, and f of x is the cost of the cover in dollars. Similar deal for the nets. We have g of x, so function g. Remember, any letter can do in math. So it's f and g here. And we have ax squared. So what's interesting is we don't have a number there, and we'll probably have to find one doing some algebra. But similarly, x is the radius in meters, and g of x is the cost in dollars. So we have some information below. A protective cover for James's trampoline costs $102.40. A net for James's trampoline costs $81.92. A net for Steve's trampoline costs $109.52. And the radius for Chris's trampoline is 1.1 meters larger than Steve's trampoline. Now, the question being asked is, how much is a protective cover for Chris's trampoline? There's a lot of dads here. What I suggest, and what generally works on the exam, is to go in order. So in order to do that, I'm going to start with James. So here we go, we've got James. And let's look at James, the first thing we're given, which is the protective cover for James's trampoline and its cost. So we notice f of x is cost, and so therefore I can kind of do some math by setting that in the f of x spot. It's 102.40, and that's going to equal 10x squared. Now, just don't forget your reverse BEDMAS when you do algebra, so we'd have to divide 10 off both sides, leaving us with $10.24, or 10.24, equals x squared. The opposite of squaring something is to square root it. So I'm just going to square root both sides, and we find out that x equals 3.2. Now notice x over here in the descriptor is that it's a radius in meters. So x is 3.2 meters. And that's the size of James's trampoline. So the thing is how can we use that information when we look at the next point? So we've done this bit. We find out that a net for James's trampoline costs $81.92. So let's deal with that part now. So I'm going to just put a line here because I don't want to run out of space on the screen. And so that was the cover. So let's talk about the net. Okay. So what we're going to do is we have a cost, and now we actually have a radius. So when we look at g of x, which is missing everything, we can actually fill in g of x and x squared in order to find out a. So I'm going to put that in there. I've got 81.92 given to me. I don't have a, but I do now know the radius of James's trampoline, thankfully. Now when you're doing this, don't forget, you square first, like follow BEDMAS. And when I do that, I get that 81.92 equals, I'll just do 3.2 squared. I do believe it's 10.24 because we just did that. So here we go. We've got a times 10.24. And again, just do your algebra where in order to isolate multiplying, we divide. And we find out that A equals 8, which is fantastic. Now what does that give us? We kind of had all the information for James, but what it gives us is a rule for g of x that we can use for the other dads. So we know that g of x equals 8x squared, and that's going to be really handy later on in our math. So let's look at the next person, because we're trying to work our way to Chris. Okay, dealt with that. Let's talk Steve. So here we go. Put Steve over here. A net for Steve's trampoline costs $109.52. So let's make sure we're using the right rule. Now we know that g of x equals 8x squared, so we have the rule. And they're telling us the cost of the net for Steve. So that they're giving us g of x. So let's plug that in. We have 109.52 equals 8x squared. It's a bit of a back and forth question. The only thing we can possibly solve for here for Steve is the size of his trampoline. So I'm going to divide out the 8 first, because we're looking to isolate our x squared. So 109.52 divided by 8 gives us 13.69. 13.69 equals x squared. And if I square root that number, so I'm going to take the root on both sides, right? We should get, I believe it's 3.7, yeah. So x equals 3.7. Now 3.7 what? 3.7 meters. Okay, so we found out some info about Steve. I noticed that they give us some information relating Steve and Chris in the next sentence. It says the radius for Chris's trampoline is 1.1 meters larger than Steve's trampoline. So I'm going to take that information and do something with it and say, well, let's find out the radius of Chris's trampoline. Because in the end of the day, the question is asking about Chris. How much is the protective cover for Chris's trampoline? Might help to start with the radius. It's bigger than Steve's. He's got the biggest trampoline. Maybe he's got the most kids. And 3.7 meters plus 1.1 meters gives us a 4.8 meter radius. Okay, for this is the radius of Chris's trampoline. It says how much is the protective cover for Chris's trampoline? Well, now we have to go back to function f, and we know f of x equals 10x squared, where x is the radius. So why don't we plug that in and find out our cost, which would be f of x. So put my 10 there, put my 4.8 squared. So I have to square that number. 4.8 squared is 23.04. And when I times that by 10, I get 230.4. And we're talking about money, so let's add that extra zero and make it a dollar value. And this is the cost of Chris's protective cover. So a couple of pieces of advice would include going through the question in order and solving as you go along. Also, if there's an unknown rule, really see what information that you have that you can plug in and then use that to find a rule such as g of x equals ax squared.